Hey guys, Seth Fuller, your favorite lawyer here. Today I interview a Veterans Court, basically the judge and the main administrator for the Denton County Veterans Court. It's an hour and 45 minutes long. Probably none of you will find it interesting unless you're just a nerd like me who like to listen to interviews of interesting people and interesting things. Or if you're a veteran facing a crime and want to know what the Veterans Court is like, this gives a great window into your average Veterans Court. Or if you're a lawyer looking for a CLE, and if you are going to watch this whole thing, contact me, sf@patelfuller.com, sf@patelfuller.com, and I'll be trying to get you some CLE credit for watching this, if it's possible. So thanks for watching, and here you go. Could you state your names and tell me what you do?
Okay, I'll go first. My name is Judge Forrest Beadle. I'm presiding judge for County Criminal Court Number 3, and that's also the Designated Veterans Treatment Court Program.
And I am Tami Russell, and I am the interim program manager for the Veterans Treatment Court currently.
So obviously Veterans Court is for soldier or former military service members who've run into some legal trouble. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're dealing with veterans from active duty, also the military reserves, but also the National Guard here in Texas. And for purposes of Texas law under Chapter 124, all those different types of service branches qualify, and that's very important to remember with the Guard, because occasionally the Guard might not qualify federally to be considered veterans, but nevertheless here in Texas they are Texas vets, and we handle all different types of service there.
Okay, and what allows there to be a Veterans Court? There was a law passed, correct, that allowed there to be a Veterans Court?
Correct. Brief history of Vet Court is back in 2008, Judge Russell in Buffalo, New York, who was not a veteran, but nevertheless he was running a drug court up there, began to run into a lot of veterans that were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan that were getting into very serious trouble with the law and had a lot of serious addictions. And he began to encounter them in his drug court. And a couple of veterans that he had working as mentors with that drug court, they just happened to be veterans, identified them, and they began to start the first vet court in Buffalo, New York. And that was 2007, 2008. Judge Mark Carter out of Harris County here in Texas heard about it, went up there, realized what they were doing and how effective it was, especially having their own vet court program. And he came back to Texas and immediately went to Austin and started getting the legislation passed to create vet court. In 2009, the Veterans Court was passed, or legislation was passed by the Texas legislature, and very quickly Judge Mary Horn, who was the county judge here in Denton County at the time, she and the other commissioners on the court immediately voted to create a program here. And there's a little more to it than that, but it sat stagnant for some time because the courthouse system, state, defense attorneys, probation, everyone else, didn't necessarily understand exactly what it was going to take to set one up. And I got tagged by Susan Peel, who was the misdemeanor chief at the time with the DA's office, to head up that program. And that's when I began looking into it.
And at the time you were a district attorney, not a judge at that
Correct.
point, right?
At the time I was actually the deputy chief of misdemeanor, and I worked directly under Susan Peel, Judge Peel now.
Okay. And so you were a DA, and everyone's trying to get this drug court together and figure out how to do it, because everybody works with it, right? The DA, the probation, the courts, and the defense attorneys all kind of work together, right?
Correct. It's now under Chapter 124 of the Texas Government Code, the legislation or the law for vet courts programs. And you mentioned drug court. It's very important that you mention that. Of course, we're talking about a vet court. But Veterans Court was modeled after a 10-step drug court program that had been around for literally decades across the country. And had been used very successfully by Judge Curzo, now D.A. Curzo in Dallas, with his district court. But it's modeled after the same type of program with several key differences. But that's how this program started. And actually, Tami was right there at the beginning, along with Gary Truitt, who used to work with supervision, and Judge Jim Crouch. We all kind of did the initial meeting together when the Commissioners Court created this back in 2009, 2010. And realized that we were starting to deal with a different population in the jail that had some reasons why they were there that needed to be looked at more closely to hopefully break that cycle. But that's kind of how all that started, and it's modeled after a 10-step drug court program.
And so it doesn't So there's no, because you said it's there. There's obviously people who've seen combat and pretty traumatic experiences, but the Veterans Court is open for pretty much anybody who is a member of the armed forces.
Correct. I'm trying to remember my legislative history. I want to say it was 2013. It might have been 15. Probably 15. Let's go with that. The legislature encountered House Bill 1048. I forget the representative's name, but he was out of San Antonio. He covered a district that included Fort Sam and the military hospitals down there. He was a Vietnam veteran himself, and he was very interested in expanding the initial Veterans Court legislation. The initial legislation only included combat vets or folks that had served in hazardous duty, which is combat. And then he passed 1048, which expanded vet court to include military sexual trauma, also included other military-related trauma. You don't have to go to combat. I've got several stories where folks were not allowed in the first version of the program. We would allow now under the current law, but also included another provision that a lot of defense attorneys don't know about. I served 6 years in the Army, but it was peacetime. I always use myself as in the Captain Beetle example. Under the old vet court law, I would not qualify. Under sub B, along with military-related trauma, military service-related trauma, and military sexual trauma, if the state, the defense, again, because this is a collaborative program, and the judge find that a veteran like me would benefit from this type of program, and also, more importantly, the public would benefit, i.e. public would be made safer, non-combat vets can be allowed into the program. And we have several, although I think still the majority of our veterans are trauma-related in one form or another, but we have several that have come in. I call that the good old boy provision, okay? You're a good guy, you screwed up, and you need some help, and we can get you help through the program, and then hopefully you will not come back into the criminal justice system. So it allows for a broad range of veterans to come in the program.
Okay, and so you get in trouble, you have a charge against you. That's how this whole thing starts.
Correct.
That's how these guys get in, right? They get arrested for something, get charged with something. What charges get you in, and what charges would not be considered for Veterans Court, if there is any?
Very good point, and brings up the collaborative nature of this and how this works in the criminal justice system. Under House Bill 1048, the District Attorney's Office, through their prosecutors, in this case it's Rick Daniel and Justin Jones, they are kind of the gatekeepers of who the District Attorney's Office will consider allowing into the program. And Mr. Johnson, you're going to put me on the spot with all five of them, but in general, no major violent offenses, okay? No drug dealers, no sexual offenses, no crimes against children, and then most felony intox crimes are not considered. Mainly that's intox manslaughter, okay? And the way to think of that, if you're a defense attorney, if it involves drug dealing, a crime of violence, or a sexual offense or something against a child, your veteran's probably not going to get in. I say probably. Some of those, there are some caveats, and you always need to call Rick Daniel and Justin Jones to take a look at it, okay? Because some of those, Mr. Johnson, who I personally thought being on the bench would never let in, has let in, and I've been very impressed with Mr. Johnson and also Rick Daniel on how they've taken a very close look at some tough cases and allowed them in, which immediately required us to take a tough look at them and then a conversation. But once I know that the District Attorney's Office is on board with it, generally I do not have a problem with them coming in.
Okay, and so you brought up defense attorneys. That's generally where this comes in, is me as a defense attorney, I'm going to have a client who has a criminal offense, and I'm going to understand that he's a vet, probably because of something in his, he tells me, or in his social history or something like that. And so then I reach out, and generally the defense attorneys are going to start the process. Is that correct?
Yes and no, and I'm going to talk for a second and then turn this over to Tami. I don't want her to remain mute this whole time because she's a huge part of this, as was Jeff Gilmore. One of the biggest problems we have is identifying the veteran. In the early days of the program, we worked very hard, both myself and my predecessor, Judge David Garcia, to get the word out to the police departments and also the defense board to let them know this program was out there. And so both the police officers, even at the time of the arrest, I've had them call me at home when I was a prosecutor in the early days of this, saying, hey, I pulled over a vet for a DWI, what'd I do? And I'm like, you do your job, but make sure you put in the report that they're a veteran. Because a lot of this is identifying the veteran, and if they're aware of that at the street level, that word will trickle up to the prosecutors once the DA's office gets the case. but probably, like you said, more quickly to the defense attorney. So my word of advice to the defense attorneys out there is y'all need to ask all your prospective clients, are you a veteran? If they are, just check yes. That might be something you come back later on to say, hey, do you want to consider vet court? But identification occurs across the board. The jails send her a letter and a list of folks that they've arrested, they've identified as veterans. And then with all the veterans groups, we have some phenomenal veterans groups here in this county. They're all aware of it too. And so they typically get the word out. And then the next step would be to Tami, and I'll let her talk about kind of what she does at the first steps.
All right, Tami, so basically you've been told that someone's a veteran and has a criminal charge, and pretty much you're the go-to person at that point, is that correct?
I am getting notification daily from the sheriff's office if we have a veteran that has been arrested.
Oh.
So I am notified on a daily basis, and there's some other municipalities that are also on at least a weekly basis that are sending me lists of individuals. And what I do is I will send out notification to that person that was arrested to let them know that vet court could be a possibility for them. So when they get with their attorneys, they can let the attorney know that this might be a viable option for them. My understanding also is the sheriff's office is when the veterans are coming in, they will identify them, but also they have been giving the veterans our card, either my card, Jeff Gilmore's card, so they can contact us and we can get the process possibly started and at least know that they are out there.
So we got this going on at a entry level. So
Correct.
y'all have done a pretty good job, it sounds like, to get these vets identified at the earliest possible place. But of course, it might not come up in any given instance, and so the judge was saying the defense attorney should at least ask every single client if they are a veteran. Again, may not be appropriate for veterans court, but at least they'll have that on their mind and can know, so that someone doesn't go through the whole system having not told anybody that they're a veteran.
Correct.
Okay, and so you get them, and they have to fill out an intake or an application. Is that how it works?
We have an application booklet, and that is available online also through dentoncounty.com under County Court at Law number 3. So that is available to the veteran and also to the defense attorneys. If they reach out to me, I'd be more than happy to send that to any of the attorneys. But it starts off with the application. Also, I need to have the DD-214 from each applicant to make sure that they have that they have been in the military. And then from there, once I get the application, there are 2 waivers. There is a court waiver that needs to be signed and also a HIPAA waiver, because we will have the VA start looking into their medical records and what they've been treated for previously. And after that, I will interview them. I will interview them and then send the information to the district attorney's office. And from there, this is what we call step 3 approval. Mr. Johnson and Mr. Daniel will review the case and make their decision if they will allow the case to go forward.
And those are the designated prosecutors from the district attorney's office. Is that
Yes, sir.
correct? Okay, and how many do you get? What's your percentage from defense attorneys' applications, and do you get a lot of pro se from these guys from the early process of them calling you to get in before they get a defense attorney, let's say?
I would say yes.
Okay.
I receive numerous phone calls from individuals that they have gotten out of the jail. They have been notified, given our cards, and I just keep a list and tell them I will keep in contact with you, have them keep in contact with me, and just make sure to follow them through the process until we get to the point where they have obtained an attorney, because they're going to need an attorney.
That's what was my next question. They need an attorney at some point to help them with the application process, and to make sure that they understand their rights and understand what's going on.
Correct. And, we give the Texas legislature a hard time sometimes. But there are a few things with the vet court law I wish they would tweak or clarify. However, from the inception, that was going all the way back to 2009, the law was written in such a fashion where you had to have criminal representation. They wanted a defense attorney involved, because a lot of the conversations that have to be had with her and the other people involved in the program Well, they have to be apprised of the rights that, of course, of what they say may come back against them. Now, we have protections in place in our screening process to make sure that just doesn't all automatically end upstairs in the district attorney's office. But that's why we want them represented before we proceed to step 3, which is when the DA's office first starts looking at them. In fact, one of the things that they have to sign, or actually have their attorney sign in our initial application packet, is a waiver. Because eventually what is built is a veterans court, kind of like a PSI, and we actually quote the PSI law, because the defense attorney has to take a look at all those reports that we prepare, bless off on them before they're released at the very end to the district attorney's office for the DA's office to make their final decision. Okay, they get a decision up at step 3, but they also get a second one at the end of the screening process. But we have to have that veteran represented by counsel to look at all that stuff so they can make an intelligent decision. Yes, I'm going to weigh my rights. I've looked at this information, which is essentially a pre-sentence investigation report, and yes, I want that disclosed to the state so y'all can start moving me towards my entry into vet court.
Okay, and so if you'll talk about that a little more. So when they're filling out the application, we want to kind of keep some worry about what they're saying to get into
Correct.
court not being used against them later if they don't get into the court. Is that correct?
Correct. I'll talk about step 3, and she can talk about the screening process and the reports. But step 3, the district attorney's office, at this point, they are just aware of the veteran defendant's name, and of course they'll have their case file that's already been filed with the district attorney's office, because we wait for the case to be filed. All right. So the case is already there in their possession. Tami or Jeff before her would send along a copy of the DD-214 to the district attorney's office so they can know this person's a veteran, that they served under these times, under these conditions, whatever the situation may be. That's all the information that comes from the program manager, and that's by design. And that way, the district attorney's office, they're making a decision at step 3 based off the case, the charge that's been filed, the veteran's criminal history, whether or not that is going to be a factor, either to be considered as a part of the treatment plan or to bar them from entry into the court, and then, of course, the general nature of their service. Now, the DD-214, I want to mention that to defense attorneys out there that might be watching this. That's basically the report card from the military. It doesn't matter what branch. It should be a one-pager, and it'll describe their years of service, what they did, where they served, how they left the service, were there any problems. And that's the second part of that I want to talk about is, politics are politics here in the county. The district attorney's office and this vet court program will consider any type of discharge, all right? If it's something less than honorable, you need to understand there'll be more scrutiny applied to that veteran. It doesn't mean they're not coming in, but nevertheless, there's a reason why they got something less than an honorable discharge. But all that's taken into account. Now, the prosecutor at that point, that's all they know. And so once they give the thumbs up at step 3 and say, yes, they may proceed, that's when we start the heavy lifting with the screening process to ultimately determine what's the best way and what services do we need to get this veteran involved in when they come in. And I'll let Tami talk about the screening process.
One second, just because I want to touch, because that's important, I want to repeat that again, because I think a lot of vets would think that a dishonorable discharge or less than honorable discharge would bar them from getting into the veterans court. But you're saying that's not the case.
It's not the case.
They receive more scrutiny depending on why they were kicked out, right?
Correct.
Something like that. But it's not going to be a bar.
There are 3 general types of discharge from the service. You have honorable, which means exactly what you think it means. They did good, and they left the service after their time was over. You have general, and there are a couple of different subcategories of general, including other than honorable, general other than honorable. And then, of course, you have dishonorable. Dishonorable, you really have to do something bad, probably at the felony level in the military to get a dishonorable. You've probably already been incarcerated somewhere within, like Leavenworth or something like that. The vast majority of the ones that do not get an honorable discharge, it is a general discharge, and that can be for any host of reasons.
Including medical, right?
Could be medical. It could be you went to basic training, you blew out your knee. It could be, you got popped on a minor drug offense, and you took that as a part of a plea deal under a UCMJ action, okay? And we deal with that all the time. Somebody that has possession of marijuana, they're not a bad person, they just got hit with a possession of marijuana case. That happens in the military too. But there'll be some codes that allow both our people with the VA and also the district attorney's office on that DD-214 that'll let them know what that is, or at least a general category, okay? Normally, all that stuff is going to be on the criminal history, which the district attorney's office will clearly already have access to. But it's not a bar if you have something less than an honorable discharge. And I know that's a conception that's out there that needs to be dissuaded. If you have a general discharge, that does not bar you from coming into the Veterans Court program. If you have a dishonorable, when I was the prosecutor, I've looked very closely at a couple of those. Neither one of them made it in. And the reason why they didn't is not only did they get kicked out for a felony offense in the military, they also had some civilian criminal history too that barred them. But again, it's not a bar. It's just something you have to look very closely at. And that's why the prosecutors and the investigators need to be a part of that process so they can actually do that.
And Tami, so tell me about the screening process. When you get it, what are the main decisions you're making? What are you looking at?
Basically, what happens with the screening process is we're going to require them to have a mental health evaluation. They will have to have an alcohol and drug abuse evaluation, and then also there is a family study that is also completed. Once those are completed, all of those reports come to me, and I, with our court clinician, because we do have a court clinician, and our Veterans Justice Outreach officer, we collaborate together and develop an integrated treatment plan for them. So each plan that is developed for these veterans, they're all individualized and based on what their needs are.
Okay. And just want to touch, because you mentioned this, I assume that a lot of your what do we call them, clients?
Veterans.
A lot of your veterans have drug and alcohol issues that they have to deal with. Is that correct, or do you have a lot that don't, or how does that generally shake out? What are you seeing?
Generally, that is what the situation is. They have substance abuse issues.
I think right now we have 32 in the program. Our record has been 34. I think out of the 32, we have one gentleman right now who literally came in with, he didn't need counseling. This was truly a situation where he was out with his buddies, did not have a drinking or alcohol issue, but he drank too much that night and he ended up here. And I mentioned the good old boy, that's probably where he fits in. Great guy, certainly deserving to come into the program, but pretty much all the rest of them need some sort of substance abuse, alcohol, or drug counseling.
All right, and can you talk about what the kind of the benefits of the I understand there's benefits of the structure, but just legally, what are the benefits? What is the participant? What are the veterans getting out of joining this Veterans Court?
Oh, this is what I call the hook. You have to understand, I've been doing this for a long time. The hook with the veterans is the dismissal and the expunction, okay? And that is a big deal, and we all understand that here working in the courthouse. But that's the hook that gets them to come in to do it. And I'll talk about what I really hope is the benefit to them here in just a moment. But under Texas law, if they do come into the program and they commence our program and complete it successfully, if they've been brought in pre-trial, they're eligible for a dismissal once they commence. And because of a change in law, I think in 2017, if that is the path that they take, if they're pre-trial, their case gets dismissed, the legislature made another tweak, which was a great tweak. They're immediately entitled to essentially an acquittal expunction within 30 days. And so not only do they get their case dismissed, they avoid any kind of jail or prison time, they get their records expunged.
So
and that's
essentially,
huge.
if they successfully complete, that basically it's as if they are not guilty for
Correct.
all practical purposes.
Correct, and that is by Texas law. Now, that's the hook that always gets them in, and of course defense attorneys, rightfully so, use very effectively. Say, hey, this is a good way to get your record cleaned up down the road. Now, what I hope that they get out of the program, and what most of the ones, when they talk, when they get their 3 minutes, when they commence, actually it's more than 3 minutes, however long they want, but they will talk about what they've learned in the program. And a lot of it is a lot of things that you really hope people in general will do anyway. And that's inward looking, understanding why they have a problem, why they're going to the bottle, why they have anger issues. And if they engage, which I force them to engage with their counselors, we let the counselors work that out with them. But the vast majority of them, when they do commence, they're very grateful for the dismissal and the expunction, but at the same time, they always take a moment to recognize the folks that helped them in the program and that they're living a better life. And that's what's truly amazing about Vet Court, is that's really what I want them to see when they get done with it.
All right, and how does the initial process work as far as, so let's say they aren't successful, so they don't get that discharge, the dismissal and the expunction. what happens then? Did they already plea to it in the initial thing? Does it start over? What goes on?
Correct. When we started this program, we adopted our program here in Denton based off Judge Carr's program down in Tarrant County. And vet court, this is one of the areas that I wish they would clarify, and the judge I'm going to work on that with the legislature in the future. But it's kind of its own little animal. It's like pretrial diversion, but it's also like deferred adjudication. We do make the defendant or the veteran defendant come in and plead guilty to the charge. Okay, we require them to do that for two reasons. One, they need to take responsibility for what they did. All right, and two is for the system. I think the record. We've had a young lady in this program over 3 years in the program on some drug charges. It took her a long time to get a handle of that drug addiction, and we make them plead guilty for that second reason. Quite frankly, so the courthouse, the district attorney's office, they don't have to resurrect a 3 or 4 year old case. Now that's an extreme circumstance.
Well, but not only that, with the with these people, you also kind of want a stick as well as a carrot.
Correct.
In other words, if they feel that they can leave the Veterans Court and possibly go get a not guilty verdict, it will be probably a little difficult. Some of them will probably be less likely to participate, as opposed to once they. Not only that, but you also don't want innocent people.
Correct.
In your Veterans Court.
Correct. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But more importantly, you want them to know that if they do mess up and leave, they're facing consequences directly and not maybe consequences if they're found guilty.
Correct. And Seth, actually, you described that very well. Going back to we make them take responsibility for the guilty plea. It's what I just said there, but it's all of that. But it's also so you can, quote, have a hammer over their head to make sure that they comply with what they promised to do when they came in the program. And one thing you mentioned there that I want to address too is, and this is another aspect of the vet court law here in Texas that I love, is if they want to quit. Well, they absolutely can. It is a completely voluntary program. They have to volunteer at the beginning with Tami. They have to volunteer before they come into the court, before they plead guilty. I make them on the record volunteer. Yes, I want to come in. But also once they're in the program, if they say, hey, Judge Beadle, I just really don't like you, I want out, they can unvolunteer. And at that point, they're out of the program. But the Texas legislature, I don't know who came up with that, but it was pure genius because it really puts the onus on them. And you're dealing with a sect of the population that understands taking an oath and making a promise and living up to what they said they were going to do. And that's a huge part of the motivation internally, I think, for these veterans when they come through the program. It's not just the hammer, it's the fact that, yes, I said I would do this.
And so if they do leave the program, I assume they're then pretty much adjudicated and punished as they would have if they had not come in. Is that generally how it works?
Yes. Every jurisdiction is a little bit different. And again, I've modified myself or this program off what Judge Carr does with one exception. If, let's say, they quit or if they get removed, if the violations are significant enough where, as a judge, I need to say, look, this is not working out, I'm removing you from the program. What we do at that point is we will reset their case for 30 days for a status hearing. In that 30 days, we do have a defense attorney, Ed Nolter, that works with this program. He's kind of like an attorney ad litem. He doesn't directly represent them, but if that occurs, he will at least get with Jordan Bredefield, my court chief here in Court 3, because all these cases are consolidated in Court 3, whether they're felony or misdemeanor. I get the jurisdiction on the felonies from Judge Evans. If it is a felony case, it'll probably go to the original court, one of the district courts. But nevertheless, they will get an offer from the state. If they wish to accept that offer, whatever it is, generally it's going to be probation on a misdemeanor. I will take that plea. All right, and that's to move them along in the process. We'll put them out on regular probation to be supervised with a regular supervision officer. Now, what I've decided to do is the judge in this matter is, let's assume that whether it's a misdemeanor, let's talk to misdemeanors. If it's a misdemeanor and they get revoked, I'm going to recuse myself on that case. And the reason why is a defendant, it doesn't matter if you're a veteran or a civilian, you need to have a neutral and detached judge. And this is something I've thought about quite a bit, and this is the ultimate decision I made on that, is if that happens, I need to recuse myself and let another one of our criminal court judges or district judge handle that revocation. And that way,
there's no
correct.
Emotional ties or and they feel that the process is fair. They don't feel like I got the same judge.
Seth, that's the key to it is, and that's what it boils down to is the defendant, the veteran in this case, but also the person on the street looking at this needs to know that the process is fair, the due process is being followed. Now, I kind of got off track there a little bit. When we come back for that status hearing, if they don't want to take the plea, then we'll give them an opportunity to hire an attorney. But we are really coming back at that point after the status hearing to a sentencing hearing, because they have already pled guilty. I didn't accept their plea guilty. Well, I accepted their plea guilty, but I didn't find them guilty at the initial plea.
But you're going to once they...
In all probability, I still have the discretion to withdraw that guilty plea. I personally believe as a judge I have the discretion to do that. The likelihood of that is probably pretty low. But it has already happened one time, and it happened with our first veteran. Way back when, L.D. Shipman had a young veteran that was on a meth case. He was moving to Denton County for a job. We were going to try to make him the first one in vet court. He came in and pled, took the vet court program, and then the job fell through. And the defense attorney asked, of course, I readily agreed as the prosecutor, and L.D. Shipman readily agreed to withdraw his guilty plea and let the case start back up.
Okay.
And he eventually got deferred on a state jail dope case.
Okay.
But, I mean, I personally feel that I have that discretion to do that, to allow them to withdraw their guilty plea. So there is even another step of due process there. If something happened in the program that was beyond that veteran's capacity to control it, and he just couldn't complete, and that gentleman's a perfect example, had to move somewhere, Amarillo or something like that, and couldn't do the program, then we can take that into account. But the vast majority of them are going to be, found guilty at that point and then pled out in some fashion.
So again, would be a very rare occurrence. But just in that instance, would they be would the things they said in vet court and their application and stuff, could that be used against them in I guess it would only be punishment at that point. So
it would be punishment, but what I do is let's assume that
let's say you let them withdraw their plea. Could that be their vet court stuff be a confession?
Everything that we do at that point through vet court, including the screening process, I order those records sealed.
Okay.
And so they are sealed, all right? And this is something I used to tell the veterans as a prosecutor, and I tell them as a judge. That information will remain sealed, all right? Now, clearly, another judge could come along behind me and say, for whatever reason, we're going to unseal it. And that has not come up in the context of a criminal case because both when I was the prosecutor and now with Rick Daniel and also Paul Johnson, this is not legal. It's a gentleman's agreement. They're not going to touch it, okay? Yeah. Now, clearly, bad things can happen that might require them to relook at that. However, the records are sealed, and a judge would have to look at that to unseal it. That's the best I can do. Best I could do as a prosecutor when I was creating this program, and the best I can do as a judge. The other context that it does come up with, and has come up in other vet court programs up north, is family law cases. And that's why I would tell the veterans, I cannot tell you 100% if we do this as the prosecutor, this information will not get out. And I would use that as an example. If a district judge coming through in a bad family law case says, I want those unsealed, County Criminal Court number 3 judge, Forrest Beadle, is not going to tell one of our district judges you can't do that.
So
they're going to trump me on
a
that.
Custody battle,
Correct.
and they wanted to bring up that crime, and they wanted to see what was going on. A district judge could unseal that and see what's going on.
Correct. Well, I think any judge could. Now, the kicker there is that would be unsealed by the judge, and then, of course, you would have a process of what gets released from the court, And so, we don't do that too much, but in the criminal context, think of like an informant or something like that, where the judge does an ex parte hearing with the detective or something like that to make it a determination. There is a legal process there to protect that person's due process rights. But like I said, it did come up in a family law case up north several years ago when we went to vet court training back last summer, or summer before last. That was brought up in one of our case studies, is, hey, you need to be aware that sometimes these records can be solved.
So you inform your participants of that, the veterans?
Correct. They're informed of that we keep this as confidential as we can. However, this is how we do it. It's not 100%. And for the most part, that has not been a problem. And it has not come up where anybody's tried to unseal anybody's records. But nevertheless, it could happen.
Tami, you talked about the screening process, in that each individual, each veteran has their own a plan to rehabilitate them, basically, because that's what this is. We're trying to rehabilitate these young men and women. And so tell me, besides that plan, what all goes on in the Veterans Court? When somebody asks, what am I going to do? What's the main things that they're going to be doing in the Veteran Court besides the stuff in that plan? because of course, there'd be counseling and stuff. But what the Veterans Court specifically, what do y'all do? When do y'all meet? What goes on with that?
The Veterans Court, they're going to be required to attend court twice a month. Right now we are Zooming because of COVID, and I think that we have done, Judge has done an excellent job of using technology and trying to get around all of that. It has been a challenge with 30, actually we have about 45 people Zooming every 2 weeks, including the staff?
Correct. We have the staff, but we also have mentors that are assigned to the vets, and those are kind of like their battle buddies, and those are complete volunteers. Most of them are ex-military, not all of them are. But with all that herd of people, I think last time it was 51 people we had on the Zoom.
And so when it's not going on COVID, you meet up here at the courthouse
Correct.
twice a month, and that's pretty intense for some people. I think that's the number one thing, that you talk to them about is you're going to be up here at the courthouse
Correct.
regularly.
Very quickly on that, the Zoom, we've been making it work. I hate the Zoom, and this is why. There are two aspects of what you talk about in person that are very critical. One, it's just it being in front of the judge, being in front of the person with the black robes, because that ongoing judicial interaction for all these treatment court programs, I mean, the evidence is just, it's uncontroverted. It is a huge impact on someone who's trying to get over any kind of issues like this, to be repeatedly in front of the judge on a regular basis. But the other aspect, which is really the sales piece for vet court, is the camaraderie, being around other vets. And that's what Zoom is very difficult about. Now, they all have, text and all that stuff that they do on Facebook and stuff like that, mainly a text chain that they have. But nevertheless, not being able to meet in the courthouse has been a daunting blow to the program.
There's no doubt the Zoom process is a completely different social
Correct.
interaction. I don't think, again, I wore this to a Zoom meeting, which I would never be able to do in any court. But I do find that that's probably, I imagine it is affecting this, because it affects just our basic stuff. The defendants, other people, they just seem to take these things less serious. And when you're up here in a courthouse meeting in person, not only is it more serious, but also when you get those interactions, those personal one-on-one interactions, basically nobody can just disconnect.
Correct.
I see people driving while they're Zooming, and that none of that's happening. You're forced to be here, and you're engaged in the process, or that's the hope.
One more story on the Zoom, though. It's been very positive. I know this a lot, but we have a gentleman who's here on some very serious charges that has been very engaged with the VA, and he had to get off a particular type of medication he didn't need to be on, and they switched it. And it took several days. We've had quite a bit of luck here recently with VA meds.
Yes.
It's a different animal down there at the VA right now. But anyway, he'd been on this medication for the therapeutic amount of time. And before, he was literally bouncing all over his living room. When I say that, I'm not going to demonstrate it for you, but I'm talking off the walls. He was moving around so much. And after he got on this new medication, he calmed down. And the other veterans watching this on Zoom, when I made the comment as the judge, I'm like, hey, your medication really seems like it's working. And he goes, it's great. Every one of them were just doing this. They all saw it on the video, how bad this guy was, until that medication settled him down. And so Zoom is not great, but nevertheless, it is very useful, and they still have some interaction and get to see one another. And that makes a difference.
Yeah, it's for sure better than nothing. I mean,
Correct.
we can all agree to that. So so they meet up here twice a week. Who all, as I understand, there's like a team, right? It's not only you two, but there's other people
It's
involved.
twice a month for court, and then they are required to see their officer, who is Evelyn Anderson, twice a month also, if not more, if it is required.
And that's her probation.
That is
probation
the
officer?
supervision officer.
Okay.
Yes.
And is she there at the court hearings also, or no?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so at the court hearings, it's going to be like a full. There's more than just you and the veteran.
It's myself, Tami. We have Evelyn from supervision, Evelyn Anderson. On the state side, we have Justin Jones and Rick Daniel. On the defensive side, Mr. Nolter, who's our staff defense attorney, he is there. Kerry Peel was our second defense attorney that was assisting. He had to move away from the program. Nothing bad there. He just needed some more time with his practice. And then we have Kathy Finch. She's our Veterans Justice Outreach Officer or Specialist from the VA. She's kind of our liaison to VA services. We also have Ms. Ronna Cutting. She's our clinician that helps us look at all the reports that we're getting in from the various counselors they're sent out to. And
Mr. Bastich.
And Paul Bastich, Paul Bastich is our county veteran service officer, and Paul has been an integral part of this team since its inception. But he and his VSOs, he's got several people that work for them. They work with the veterans with their benefits, should they choose to apply for them. But that's another benefit of this program. We make them go see Paul or his people within the first 2 weeks. And whether they apply for it or not, those VSOs over there at the county VSO office, they will let them know what they're eligible for. And that can be financial, it could be medical, it could be education, whatever. They let them know, hey, you are eligible for this. And in many cases, a lot of problems and a lot of the stress and anxiety is cured by them actually applying for benefits.
And there's no set time period for this, right? They aren't put on a certain amount of months or anything, right? It's just they got to complete the program. Is that correct?
Correct. We break it up into 3 phases. And a lot of what we're talking about, meeting with the supervision officer and coming to court twice a week, it's one thing a week. That's phase 1. As they progress through phase 2 and phase 3, things get relaxed. As far as the monitoring goes, we make them do transdermal, interlock, drug patches, and UAs.
That's all phase 1 or through all the phases?
That's through phase 1. When they promote to phase 2, which is at least...
So hold on, for everybody who doesn't know. Transdermal that's the patch that they wear that detects...
transdermal is a scram device. It's the bracelet.
Oh, it's the bracelet. Okay.
It's the bracelet. Interlock, of course, everybody knows what an interlock is on their motor vehicle. We use a drug patch also from Recovery Healthcare.
That's the one I'm talking about. That's a patch that goes on your arm that detects through your body fluids or that whether you use drugs or not. Is that correct?
Correct. It doesn't do alcohol, but it'll do THC, cocaine, opioids, I believe, and methamphetamines. So the major ones. Okay.
How does that work with? I assume that some of them are on some medications that may contain similar things to that. Correct? I mean, I know some of the stimulants can test positive for.
You want to talk about the prescription log?
We have a prescription log that is required, and even when they are applying that prescription log, and there's also a letter from the doctor that's included in the application book, because we really do need to know because of what you're talking about, so we know what is in their system and if they pop hot for something. They're going to be doing frequent in phase 1, frequent UAs. Is it twice a week?
Phase 1's twice a week.
Phase 1. And so it's crucial that we know. Also, any type of supplements that they're taking. It's amazing what supplements. People think that, you can buy whatever and it's not going to affect your body. Yes, it will.
Oh no, I'm an MMA ref and judge, and this is a huge thing in the UFC right now because they do really strict testing, and the supplements is always a problem because there's with supplements it's not FDA approved or anything.
Absolutely.
So they'll have batches of stuff that is contaminated and that can test positive.
One of the things that we have dealt with recently, which was very surprising, was energy drinks.
Yep.
There is a gentleman that we have that's a participant that was buying energy drinks over the internet, not out of 7-Eleven, but over the internet, and it's specifically geared towards gamers. And as you said, it's not FDA regulated, and there were some very interesting things.
He was, to be blunt about it, because I know your brethren there in the defense department are going to watch this, he was testing positive for cocaine.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if that was an energy drink or not, but one reason why we went to this prescription log, and this was part of my old angst in the past, was honesty has to be the first thing they're thinking of, because if they're not honest with us, they're not being honest with themselves, and we're wasting our time. They have to let us know what they're on, good, bad, or ugly. It doesn't mean they're going to end up over in county jail. It just means, okay, you need different treatment. Mm-hmm. You need a higher level of care. But on the supplements and all this stuff, we have to know what to expect in that UA result. And so they need to tell us. And so the supplements are a huge part of that prescription log. And a lot of what we're trying to do is to eliminate anything that might mess with the UAs, but also, as I tell them, by giving us this information, you're also protecting yourself from a positive UA. Because I can't ignore a positive UA. It's just, I can't. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to go to jail, but nevertheless, if we start getting multiple ones, at some point it's like, look, you're not being honest with us, and I got too many people up here working on your benefit to waste their time. You have to be honest with us on what you're doing so we can help you.
So that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to ask next, which is, I know with the drug court, it's kind of a a step process, as opposed to if you're on probation and you violate probation, they're going to violate your probation and they're going to want more punishment, whether that be, from deferred to regular probation or to put you in jail. They're going to want that punishment, and it's kind of a all or nothing process essentially. Once let's say you're on deferred, you're going to be found guilty. But with these processes, I know drug court tends to use this, which is there's kind of interim steps, which is you pop positive, you're not going to be violated and brought in and start over, but there is certain punishments that can be dealt with in the court. Is that how Veterans Court works also?
There are two types of sanctions we deal with. There are judicial sanctions and then treatment sanctions, okay? Judicial sanctions are what most people think about, and that is jail time, okay? It could be, generally that's it. It's going to be jail time, it's going to be like community service, it's going to be stuff like that that's more punitive in nature to try to correct the behavior.
But that sanction is within that system, so
Correct.
It doesn't. So if you get kicked off and deferred, you now have a conviction on your record. But that's not the case here, right? You can have a sanction, in other words, a punishment within the system that isn't going to reflect outside once you're done.
Correct. And so that's the internal sanctions. Is again, they came in and they pled guilty. I accepted their plea, but I made no findings of guilt. We really hold them here in the program under bond conditions. In fact, whatever bond they have, if they have a surety bond, we immediately convert it to a PR bond. But they're here on bond conditions. So that's kind of the jurisdiction and authority of the court I have to put them over there if I need to in Hotel Murphy. All right. Now, that is the option of last resort. Okay. It could be the option of first resort depending on the violation. But generally, you don't want to do that. You really are looking at treatment sanctions, and that is trying to identify what the problem is. Do we need to tweak our treatment to get you what you need, or do we need to try to, in some fashion, teach you a lesson to try to correct your behavior, short of a judicial sanction, which is community service, jail time, something along those lines.
And so by treatment sanctions, you're talking about go back to inpatient or start an intense outpatient or something?
Correct. You jump to the highest one we have, which is inpatient. And we have some good opportunities there with the VA for good inpatient treatment. Okay, over in Bonham, over in Big Springs, down in Waco, down in Dallas. Okay, but that is one that's kind of the top end inpatient treatment. Some folks need it right out of the gate, but generally you're gonna start with what you think is the best level of care, and maybe one step below. That way you have a little bit of movement as you move up through it. So typically it's individual counseling.
Typically, it's individual counseling based on the evaluations. You could be looking at starting off with SOP, supportive outpatient, intensive outpatient. But if something is going on, we are, as a team, we will get together, clinician, myself, Veterans Justice Outreach, and we will try to increase the level of care or what's going to be appropriate and help that individual. It's a treatment court.
And so I assume, generally the people you're probably going to be putting in jail are people who are not engaging in that sort of, in the treatment correctly. Would that be correct?
That would be correct. Or they're continue to test positive, where there's just no doubt that they're still using, that they're ignoring the court program. Now, you understand you're dealing with folks that have substance abuse issues, so we don't go right to the jail aspect there. But nevertheless, if they just continue to violate that policy, it is about them individually, but it's also about the program as a whole, because these other veterans see what's going on, and so you need to make sure that you understand you're treating the individual, but you're also treating the group. And military guys especially, trust me, when they see somebody that's done bad get promoted, they don't like that. Where especially if they're doing what they need to be doing, and they're always going to their counselor, and they're always doing exactly what you told them to do, and they're not moving up the same way. We have to be very mindful of that.
Yes.
That it's not that it's the punishment is always the same across the board, because as I stressed to them, this is individualized care. My reaction to this person's violation might be completely different than this one. If I'm dealing with a hardcore alcoholic drug addict over here who falls off the wagon, that's different than this guy that just decided, you know what, I got promoted at work, I'm going to go out and drink, and I don't care what Judge Beadle thinks. That guy might go to jail. This guy might get a higher level of care, might go to jail and get a higher level of care. Whatever we think collectively might get the message across and put them back on the right track.
So what's the range of jail time you're generally giving out for these things?
Generally what we do, and I haven't done this too much, but generally what I've done with jail sanctions is 2 weekends. And so we do court on a Wednesday. I kept that same schedule for my predecessor, Judge Garcia, because it would be best if we did vet court on Fridays, especially for the jail sanctions, because you send them right over there. But I kept that schedule because of how we're intermixed with the other courts. And quite frankly, I don't think the defense bar would have liked me too much if I'd really jacked with the schedules that everyone was used to. But we do 2 weekends based off the fact we do vet courts on Wednesdays. And the reason why we do that is I make them report Friday. So we make sure they're secure. They generally know they're going at that point. The defense, Ed and then Kerry before, had done a very good job of prepping them. Hey, he's probably going to put you in jail. So, and we do that because, of course, we always watch, what we call force protection. We're dealing with a group of people that has a high rate of suicide. And so we want to make sure we're doing that appropriately. But when we do have to put them in jail, they typically go that Friday. They get out Monday morning in time to go to work. And we do it Friday night so they can work out the rest of the week. But the second weekend, if I do jails, I like that aspect of it because they, quite frankly, have to think about it. They've very quickly done their first weekend. They go to work the next week, and then they have to realize, I got to do this again. And from there, you're looking at more, maybe another 2 weekends or maybe a week. I've never put anybody in straight for a week.
And if it's longer than I'm guessing, you would start thinking about removing them from the program. That's not for them.
Yes and no. And the reason why I say that was I had a very good conversation with former Judge Crusoe and D.A. Crusoe down in Dallas about that.
I actually had lunch with him, and he was, Judge, I tried my first felony, or didn't try, got to the trial of my first felony.
Well, of course, he's been doing this for a long time, but also one of, Solutions, Scott Weisenbaker. I've talked a lot with Scott over the years about this. You don't want to go right to jail, but at some point, people have epiphanies when they're incarcerated. And not saying that works all the time, but nevertheless,
as a defense attorney, you see it right away. You'll see the hardest, I don't care, send me to jail, I'm done with this. And then, literally the third day of jail, they're calling the mama and begging them to get him out, and calling you and begging them to get back that deal. And yeah, for sure.
Well, I think that is real. And again, that's something that has to be considered by the team. What are we doing? Do we really think this will help, or are we spinning our wheels here? If we think it'll help, again, I've never put anybody in jail for 30 days in this program. But nevertheless, I'm not afraid to do that if I think it will be a benefit. At some point, though, if you realize it's not going to work out, then removal's the right way to do it. But I put this in my manual, and I meant this, and that is in the participants manual, the last page of this thing talks about if they're still willing to work, and I truly believe they're still willing to work, we're not going to remove them. We're going to try to find some way to keep them going. But that they have to show us at that point that they really want to be better. Not just get their dismissal, but they really want a better life. And they have to show us that. And that's way at the end. We've worked with them quite a bit at that point already.
So let's talk about that. What is the average length of time that this process goes?
I always say about 15 months, okay?
Which is standard. I mean, that's pretty much what you're looking at for most probation. Lower misdemeanor probation.
It's pretty standard. The phrase that Jeff Gilmore used to use, of course we used in the military all the time, was, we train to standard, not to time. And that's why I really stress the individualized nature of the treatment plans for these folks. You can move quicker, you can move slower. They always worry about, so-and-so and I came in on the same day, but he moved up before I did.
Yeah.
And I always stress to them, don't worry about that at all. Worry about your day-to-day. You are going to move up, you are going to progress. I think the record we had in this program under Judge Garcia was about 10 months. This guy was right as rain. Okay, nobody get excited.
Record.
Yeah.
Quickest.
Yeah, that was the record as far as getting done the quickest.
And you said another lady did 3 years?
Did 3 years. But the average is probably about 15 months. And the reason why we do that, again, I say we train to standard, not to time. Nevertheless, time is a factor, especially if you're dealing with sobriety. Sobriety is huge. We track it. I make them tell me, when was your last drink? Mm-hmm. And we track that date because the longer you stay sober, the further through that pink cloud, that's a term that folks use, the pink cloud of, hey, I feel great, I've been sober for 90 days, and then life hits you, and you immediately go back to the bottle or the needle. So the longer you're able to stay sober, the more counseling you're able to work. When life does hit you, you'll react more appropriately. And so time does matter, but we're never worried about time, if that makes sense.
That standard you're talking about, I assume, is the team gets with everybody, the providers and the team that's been watching them, and y'all decide that.
Tami can tell you, I'm always beating her up. What does the counselor say? Is this guy ready to move up?
Okay.
Yes.
And so the standard you're talking about at the end is he's at a place where we think he can deal with life's ups and downs,
Yep.
and he won't
Using the
commit another
tools
crime or-
that they have been given.
Yeah. And this is my personal belief as far as my role as judge. Okay, I'm not speaking for all, just me. My role is to be the judge, and really what that boils down to is I need to encourage them. I need to motivate them, whether that's good, bad, or ugly, to do what they need to do with their treatment program. But my job is to enforce that treatment plan, all right, along with our supervision officer, Evelyn Anderson, and also the program manager, okay? My job is not to be the clinician or the counselor or the therapist. Those are the smart people, and I need to make sure that I'm enforcing that program where they're going to the smart people and actually engaging them. And we work with, we mentioned Solutions. We also work with Tomorrow Counts, with Julie Tyner Ortega, and several other counselors that have actually been brought on board by the participants. They've already had counselor before they got in the program, and we've brought those folks on and gotten into MOUs with them, memorandums of understanding, to be a part of our program. But I'm very dependent upon the counselors to tell me what they think, because I know I'm not Dr. Phil. I'm a judge. That's my role.
So that's got to be pretty difficult dealing with both the drug addiction issues and the completely interrelated and intertwined PTSD issues, trauma issues. And so do you find that you use the same counselors for both, or do you have specific counselors for specific things, or how does that generally work?
We have specific counselors. If they have been identified and they have PTSD, we have counselors that deal with what we call seeking safety, and they are specifically going to be paired with those veterans to deal with that PTSD, along with the substance use.
And
they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
They travel together.
Yep.
Yeah. And what percentage, I mean, not official, but just generally, what percentage are you finding have a diagnosis of PTSD? I would imagine it was high, but
75.
I would say 75.
Yeah.
One of the things I found kind of shocking is we got out of Iraq many years ago, and we moved further away from Iraq. You would think we would see less combat-related PTSD. That's not been the case. I've been very surprised by that. Now, we see a lot of other types of trauma, especially sexual trauma, both men and women, I might add.
Yes.
In fact, it's about 50-50 that we've seen
so
come
talk
through the
about that,
program.
because I think that is something that's just recently been talked about more and more. This is basically some kind of unwanted sexual contact, or there is rapes and such that go on. Is that what you're finding? Is that what you're what do you when you say that? What are you generally running into?
Well, it's all types of sexual trauma, not just military sexual trauma. It could have been trauma as a child,
Yes.
where they were abused as a child. Then they went into the military. Then they went to combat. Then they picked up the bottle. I mean, sometimes you're talking triple diagnosed issues. But and that's very complicated. But it could be any type of sexual trauma. With military sexual trauma, it could be full-blown sexual assault. It could be, any level without getting. I know we're all criminal attorneys here, but it could take any flavor under the sun of sexual assault.
And so you touched on something that I find is interesting. So because this is kind of, like you said, it's modeled after the drug court, and or at least modeled close to a drug court. And I find that even in that drug court, you'll find a huge amount of trauma, fueling addiction in general. I mean, I don't think that anybody would dispute that trauma and addiction
Absolutely.
tend to go together. And so, but this is something different. Can you tell me what you think is different about this? You talked about the camaraderie. What do you think is different for a veterans court than a drug court?
Okay, you're talking about specifically the trauma.
Well, I'm talking about just like, so why wouldn't we just put these guys? You said almost all your guys have drug issues. Why wouldn't we just put them in a drug court? Why have a separate veterans court, I guess?
Because they are veterans. I mean, and the reason why I say that is they come from regardless of their background, where they came from to get into the military, they have that joint and shared experience of going into the military. For most of them, it's going to basic training, going to their first unit, regardless of the branch. they all have that shared experience of camaraderie. They all have some sense of integrity and honesty and, some level of honor. That can vary quite a bit, but nevertheless, they've been exposed to organizations throughout the military where that's expected of them. You're expected to take responsibility for what you did. And that's another reason why we make them plead guilty, because that's very innate in them to accept that responsibility and now to move forward and fix things. And that's a huge part of the vet court program. That's why Judge Carter came back from Buffalo, New York, and said this is the way to go with these vets, because it gets them amongst their brothers and sisters. And that is a huge motivating impact for them, because they don't want to be the one that messes up in the formation, that makes the team fail. And so that helps motivate them both consciously and subconsciously, I believe, through their counseling. The goal is at some point they're going to have to stand up on their own, but they will have this connections. And the other good thing about Denton County is we have such a large veterans community. It also exposes them to the larger 45,000 veterans we have in this county, which is why we get Paul Bashis and the VSOs involved with the county, so they can see that once I leave vet court, I'm not alone. Because that's the other thing too. You really got me on a soapbox here. But a lot of what the veterans experienced when they came back from Iraq and Afghanistan was they did their time, they went to combat with all the stuff that happened to them there, and then they come back and they get back in the civilian world, and that unit's gone. Vet court is designed, hopefully from the camaraderie, to kind of rebuild that sense of unity. And they always say in the Army that the basic unit level is the company level, because you're all one big family. But that's kind of the idea behind vet court, is you get them exposed back into that military mindset, not 100%, but nevertheless just enough where they remember what that was like.
Yeah, but also I imagine when these guys give back, there really is a disconnect, a complete severance of everything. In other words, you don't find a lot of following up on how was your service, once you leave. It's just pretty much
you're done. Yeah.
You're done. Go out, be good. And I imagine that having this kind of forcing them into that the treatments that we do provide. You talked a lot about. I like what you talked about with the VA, because you get kind of a mixed bag when you hear people talk about the VA. You can get horror stories, and you can get no, I love it. It's great. And sometimes locations will be like, oh, if you go to this one here, it's awesome. But I think the cool thing is to hear that at least I imagine that these types of court also help the VA and help you kind of hold them accountable for helping these people. Would you agree with that?
Well, it does. And it's a very good point that you bring this up, because I had a conversation with one of the psychiatrists from the VA about a month ago with a gentleman we had down seeing her. The VA, it is voluntary treatment. And so if they come in and say, I don't want to do that, I'm not doing that, doc, they're not going to make them do it, because they have no authority to make them do it. But as I explained to the psychiatrist, it was a particular medication, psychotropic medication she wanted him to try, that by all accounts in our treatment team we thought would work. And I told her, I said, look, he's here in my court program. If this is what you want him to do, if you tell me to order it, I will order it. And then it's under the authority of the court. And because they're in the criminal justice system on these bond terms, I can order that. Now, I would never do that because I'm not Dr. Phil. But if his treating psychiatrist says, look, he needs to try this at least for a month to see if it helps, I can order that where he has to try that for a month. And literally, if he says, no, I'm not doing it, was like, well, you need to decide whether or not you want to be here, because everybody we've had look at you, including your doctor at the VA, wants you to do this, and I'm going to order it. And so then they have a choice to make. And, they will comply. And in this particular case was the same example that I gave of the guy that got on the medication. And next thing you know, he's not bouncing off the walls. Everything is smoothed out. And that's a good medication.
Person.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you would say that this has been successful so far. You'd say the Veterans Court is a pretty good thing.
Oh, no question. Literally no question about that.
You talked about earlier before we started, we were talking, and you said how many people have been discharged, unsuccessfully completed this?
Since I've been the judge, we've had two.
How long have you been doing this?
Since January 1st, 2019.
Okay, and before that, how long has it been going for a while?
It's funny that you mentioned that. I always use the date November 23rd, 2012, I believe. Okay. And the reason why I say that is we had a couple of different versions of this program before. As the prosecutor, I got permission from Paul Johnson and Jamie Beck to set up the the full deal.
Okay, and so before
the
you
current
became
program.
judge, and I think we already covered this a little bit, but you were the prosecutor who
Mhm.
was interacting with, and in fact helped start the current
Correct.
iteration of the Veterans Court, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so you said that was like 2012.
2012, we really started playing around with this. 2010 and 11, and that started because the law had been on the books for a while, but I had a good close friend of mine I grew up with that did a tour in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, before we kind of thought we were looking for the needle in the haystack as far as the criminal justice system was concerned. But I watched him have a full-blown PTSD meltdown right in front of me, and that disturbed me immensely. And what I immediately did when I got back to work on Monday was went right to Judge Pogorski, and we started the process. Because Ski was a vet court judge for a while, and then he decided to medically retire, and that's when David Garcia volunteered to pick up the program. But I think numbers-wise, I didn't think, Seth, to count those up before you got here. With what we've had since I've been on board, we're over 100 that have commenced through the program. In fact, I just had one of them come back and visit me that commenced under Judge Garcia. He's very active here with one of the local veterans organizations, and he came back to visit like last week, I believe, on some things that his organization was working on. I don't want to say specifically or identify him.
So,
but
what you said. So I'm sorry I interrupted you. So how many since you were judge has been discharged unsuccessfully or?
Oh, unsuccessfully, just two.
Two.
Yeah.
Two, and you have at any given time you said something like 35 participants, 30 to 35.
We currently have 32, and I would say since I've been on the bench, probably the average has been around mid-20s. But we project that we're going to maintain 30 or more for the next 6 months. Jeff Gilmore, of course, is deployed right now with the Texas National Guard. He did a very good job of kind of prepping the next few months.
He was in Tami's role before.
He was in Tami's role before.
He went.
And I think we're about through the ones that he has kind of gotten through here. But through December are ones that both Jeff and Tami initially screened and kind of got prepped. And
so
then you're on your own to find new ones in the spring.
Well, we've had a lot of
Yeah.
requests for transfers.
Yes.
Yes.
The program since COVID, I imagine it has also changed, but I would imagine that you'll be seeing soon more people coming in because this being locked up in your own house.
During COVID, actually, I will say we have been extremely busy.
Oh, okay.
We really
I
have.
expected that, but I didn't know.
Very, very busy.
How has that affected your participants? I mean, you said you've been doing it by Zoom, but do you find that they're having a tougher time or doing okay since they got the support? Or
I think like everybody in general, they're having a tougher time. A lot of them, like the rest of society, they converted from office work to in-home work, but that's not necessarily a good thing for our population because they isolate. And there are a couple of them in the program that I'm very concerned about because they have been isolated for a long time. One of which is his disability rating is 100%. He is considered unemployable by the VA. But because he's unemployable, he's financially he's okay, but that's where he kind of stays.
yeah.
But the other aspect of that is he's just staying home. And so we've been really encouraging him to get out, and even though he's been doing everything like he has to be doing, get out and do some community service, get out there. I normally don't encourage them to join veterans organizations while they're in the program. They got enough on their plate. But he's one that I've encouraged to join a veterans organization, as long as it doesn't have a bar.
So you've been doing it for a long time, and I want to talk about you mentioned this earlier, the risk. Have you had any issues of suicide or anything like that?
Under Judge Garcia, we've only had one suicide, thank goodness. But under Judge Garcia, we had one, and it really affected everybody, myself and also Judge Garcia and everybody that was a part of the team, because he came to court. I still remember him walking down the hallway, and he had done a lot in his life to try to get off the drugs and alcohol, but he was living in a halfway house. And he comes to court. He starts talking. He's doing fine, but then he mentions his girlfriend broke up with him, And then towards the end, he said he was changing jobs because he, got let go, but he was looking at a couple other jobs. And then when he went home, there were some rules that they had to follow in the sober house that he had violated, and they got together and removed him. And then, fortunately, he did not kill anybody, but he shot up the place and then shot himself.
He shot up the sober house?
Yes.
He did. That happened a long time ago, but I can, as I'm looking at you, Seth, I can still see him walking down the 4th floor hallway. Because at the time, the hair on my neck was raising, but we had just started this program. I was extremely concerned, and I have not forgotten that veteran. I never will. I don't know what we could have done with him, but he was one that we all remember.
Oh, yeah.
Because of what happened.
Look, I think it's an interesting thing because, just statistically, if you had 101, you're beating the odds. This is some crazy statistics out there for veterans and suicide. And so obviously something's working, but I think it's an interesting thing to think about because you're probably dealing with one of the highest risk populations around, which is someone who has a criminal charge pending, who obviously is going down a road where they got that criminal charge. They have drug and addiction problems, like you said, most of them do. But at the same time, you kind of reverse that with the treatment from the Veterans Court, which is they're probably getting more services than almost any other
And I'm going to
veteran.
interject with that. I have to do, we have grants, and so there's an evaluation I do with them at the beginning, the very day that they come into the court. So I have interaction with them. At a 6-month point, I have to have action or do an assessment with them, the reevaluation, a 6-month point. There is a gentleman that when I first came into the court that I did the assessment on, and I was extremely worried about him. Just his answers, you could tell that he was severely depressed. This past week, I did the 6-month with him, and in a 6 months period, totally different person.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different person. And he said a lot of it had to do with the services that he's getting. And he told me when I first came in, he said, I know when I was sitting in front of you that my attitude and that my answers, he goes, I was just angry that I was here. I didn't give a darn about, what I was about to do. He goes, I get it now. I get it. And you guys do care. And I'm very appreciative for everything. Totally different from when I first engaged with him 6 months prior.
And see, Seth, real quick on that, that's, again, coming back from the joint experience in the military. When you're in a squad or a platoon or something like that, generally it's a family. They're looking out for you for different reasons. And when you leave the service, that's gone. And that's a huge shock to a lot of these young vets when they get out. And so coming into a program like this and having somebody like Tami or Kathy Finch from the VA or their mentor, we haven't really talked about the mentor programs, but the mentors are huge. Mm-hmm. It does open them up to the fact, look, it's not the same thing, but nevertheless, you're not alone. There are a lot of folks out here that do give a damn about you, and that gives them a little bit of that family sense again. And one of the ways I always kind of describe treatment court programs in general is it's one of the few times that the criminal justice system kind of warms up. All right, because usually it's very cold. I was a prosecutor for years, looking at case files. You don't even really see the name. You're looking at the facts. What do I want to do with this? And then I got to move on to the next 30 cases. And that's what I love about treatment court programs is they become an individual, and you realize, this guy's a red hot mess, but nevertheless he can be helped. And then the ultimate goal, which is protecting the public and putting somebody back in society where they're not going to reoffend, that they're going to be productive. That they're not going to kill themselves and stuff like that. That's really what has always fascinated me about this. Once I started, I didn't tip my toe in it. I ended up jumping in with both feet, but I kind of got pushed into the pool. But once I realized what this was, I'm like, this is a great thing. And it's not just vet court. It started off with DWI court, and I'm like, if we can do this with recidivist drunks, I know we can do it with vets, and then that translated into
mental health, drug
courts. I'm just, as I tell folks, I drank the punch on these treatment courts. I really think it works.
That was actually going to be my follow-up question, or at least a question I had planned, which is, because I like that you said that, because I find that society is heading that way, and it's the one positive thing I think, one of the main positive things happening right now in the justice system is we're heading towards identifying that, of course, veterans have a unique trauma in the combat, especially combat veterans have a unique trauma that almost nobody else has. But everybody has these traumas, and I would say 90% of the people in these court systems have some sort of pretty affected trauma.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I just don't think the current probation system is necessarily addressing them, and it's a one size fits all, right? So someone who is severely, sexually abused as a kid is in here at the same time a kid who, whose dad died when he was 14. Now those are both traumas, but probation kind of deals with it the same, honestly. And so these treatment courts do seem to be a huge benefit for everybody, and I like what you said, which is expanding them seems to be a positive thing that's going on. And when I talk to the people who work in every court, there seems to be nothing but positive things. Of course, not everything has a drawback. There are people who are going to be kicked out or whatnot, but I just like that. And so I like that you said that you drink the punch. You do think that these treatment courts are kind of where we should be going in the criminal justice system. Not for everything, but for a huge, wide range of people in this system.
I think so. And again, I'll go back to the law, because in 2015, there was a huge push to remove the prosecutors from the screening process. Okay, and I won't get into all the details, but it's the first time I got political. I wrote a bunch of letters. And the reason why I said that is one of the aspects about these treatment court programs that is huge is the collaborative nature amongst all the parties. Okay, it starts with the defendant, and of course, the police at some point down the road, not at the arrest. But once, of course, they get charged, it's the district attorney's office, the prosecutors working with the defense attorneys to say, this is a guy we need, or a gal, we need to move over here because we can do something better and different with them. And understanding that that's not always going to be the case. Some of them are going to go the treatment route, some of them are going to go the prison route. It's understanding what the laws and the criminal justice are here to do, which is primarily to protect the public and enforce order. Now, those are highfalutin terms. What I mean by that is there's a lot you can do within that to still meet that mission and treat someone like an individual, give them the treatment they need, knowing that the ultimate goal is you will never see them again in court unless, like this veteran did a week ago, they're coming back to visit you, okay? And I think that's very important to remember. I don't disagree with kind of the cookie-cutter philosophy of probation, but I am going to take a moment to say I really think we have a phenomenal supervision department here in Denton. It's not the same across all the Texas jurisdictions, but Toby Ross and Peggy Carr before him did a phenomenal job of building that outfit. I think it's kind of like being the prosecutor with that mountain of files that they just threw on your desk. You only can do so much. I think probation can be better if they're given more tools and resources. The reality of that is that's probably not going to happen unless collectively across the state the legislature start taking more of a closer look at what's going on in these treatment courts. I think they can realize that there are a lot of programs they could do over their probation that would help the general population that's going through supervision that may not qualify or want to be a part of one of these treatment court programs. But I don't disagree with you. It's just there's a lot going on.
Absolutely, kind of was my point. Is like if probation, and I would say it would have to be the whole system, because that's what you have here, right? You have like an entire system,
correct,
that's geared towards helping people not commit crimes again. And so I think, and again, I'm trying to like denigrate or bad.
No, I know you weren't. I know you weren't.
I'm just saying that we can learn from these things, and if we can incorporate that into a general probation, I think we'll all see better results, because that's what we're talking about in the end. I mean, of course, these veterans benefit from it, but also the public in general, the families of the veterans, and just everybody they seem to be benefiting from this program.
Well, one of the things that has translated here recently, I think, in criminal law in general, is deferreds for DWIs. I know this is kind of off the vet court. Yeah. But I think, and actually, I know a lot of prosecutors. I was doing it for 13 years before I took the bench. We were actively looking for deferreds on DWIs, and one of the reasons why is someone that messes up that you're never going to see again in the system, because the vast majority of folks get arrested for DWI and go through the criminal justice system you never see again in the courthouse. It gives them an opportunity to clean up their record once they prove to the court and society that, hey, I screwed up, I learned from it, I'm done. And that is a positive step too, but there needs to be a lot of others in our criminal justice system.
Yeah, and I think it's just a general swing from us trying hardcore law and order and seeing if it works.
Correct.
And seeing that it doesn't work in all cases for a lot of people, and us just I think we're finally with these courts just looking for finding a different solution that actually, we all want to be like, no, that person was dealing drugs, or that person was, hit his wife or whatever. This person drove drunk, and we're done, and you just can't have tolerance for it. If they see any tolerance, they're going to keep doing it. And then I think we're kind of going, okay, well, that was good to say, but in the end, we're still getting the same recidivism. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And now we're seeing that by taking these different approaches, you get a whole different result, and it's almost transformative, amazing, especially when you get the whole system in, like these courts. So I think everybody agrees that we should be working on it.
You said something recidivism. I want to follow up with that real quick. I couldn't tell you the exact recidivism rate of this program from its inception. We've had recidivists, okay? You're always going to have recidivists. The reason why I bring that up is a couple of years ago, we went down to Austin, all the vet court programs did, and do best practices. And there were several programs that stood up and said, hey, we've got a 0% recidivism rate. And I'm sitting there, and Jeff Gilmore was with me, and I'm looking at him, I'm like, well, that's great, but you're not looking at the right folks, because you're going to have a recidivism. And if you're worried about having any kind of recidivism rate, your program is not going to be a healthy one. And what I mean by that is you need to look at the high-risk, high-need people. Okay, not all of them are going to complete successfully, but the ones that do complete successfully, that's why you're in business.
Do you ever think about that? Because I think what you're saying is profound and clearly true. But with these things, the problem is, you said the one guy who shot up the halfway house and then shot himself, okay? If that guy had shot 7 people in that halfway house, I mean, there's a real danger that the entire program can be scrapped. And you get the same with just general recidivism, is like, oh, you're getting a 10% general. Well, obviously, that 10% is not getting anything out of it. But I just think, especially with legislation and politics, we tend to ignore the overwhelming success versus what we were doing before. And is that scary to you? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
no, going back to that one event, our program at that point was so early that if something that horrific had happened, we might not be talking here today, because we might not have a vet court program. And that's something that I've always stressed, is both the prosecutor when I was prosecuting here and also now as the judge. When we screen them, and we're always looking to improve our screening process, but when we screen them, we need to understand we are looking for the veterans that need to be helped, but also the ones we can help. But we also need to prepare treatment plans that take into account, again, I called it force protection. But force protection just doesn't include the veteran. It also includes society as well, too. We have to make sure that we hold them to account. And again, that comes back to the role of the judge. If they're not following the treatment plan, I need to make them follow their treatment plan, or we need to remove them. But that's a huge concern.
But at the same time,
yeah,
there's no perfect thing.
Right.
And I get just a frustration of mine that what I see, because it is political, you have to have legislation to do this, you have to have the funding. I just get so frustrated because you see great programs or great things that we're doing well just completely thrown aside for these crazy, I say one-time events, but or just general these exceptions to the rule. Like, everyone's expecting every program, everything we do to do great, but then when what we're doing is not even close to that, nobody takes a look at that. They just say, well, but that didn't work.
That's kind of society in general. But I want to say something right now about Paul Johnson, Justin Jones, and Rick Daniel. Over the last couple of years, they have really sent us some hard cases, okay? And a couple of them, having been the former prosecutor, I'm like, I don't know about this one. But after talking, this is way at the end of the process. Once they've already made the decision, yes, we want them to come in. But from talking to Rick, who does most of the screening work with Paul directly, Paul Johnson, I've been very impressed at the amount of effort and consideration they put into these. And not that the DA's office has to explain themselves to me, but nevertheless, they were hot enough cases that I wanted some explanation. After they explain themselves, I'm like, I totally get it, and we'll do what we can. But they have very carefully and very meticulously taken some risks that I've been very impressed that they're willing to do it. And actually, more than a little bit humbled that they trust the team that we've got to do this. And, of course, they know that Judge Beadle will watch them very carefully. And we've talked about one of those vets right now. and he has done well. He's responded very well to the opportunity he got to stay out of Huntsville, and that's been very impressive. Now, he's got a lot of work to do, and so do all of them, but nevertheless, they're doing exactly what we've asked them to do, and that's been very impressive that the DA's office has been willing to take those risks.
So that's my next question. Which do you like better? Do you like being the prosecutor assigning the cases, or do you like being the judge who decides how it goes?
Oh, that's a good question. I will tell you, my stress level is immensely less than what it was being a felony court chief, and it's kind of hard to get away from that, because I literally, as I tell folks, I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking about a case, especially bad ones. And when I say thinking, not dreaming about it, but critically thinking, I got no sleep. And criminal defense attorneys, prosecutors, they all have those experiences when they're worried about their cases. I think all attorneys do.
Yeah, of course.
But coming to be the judge, you don't have those same concerns. You're wanting to make sure that the process is followed correctly, the Constitution is followed, the law is treated fairly to both sides, the defendant gets their due process rights. It's a different setup when you're kind of removed from the facts of it until they're presented to you. And so that has been a very pleasant change. Now, I will tell you, we haven't tried a case since February. But nevertheless, every once in a while, as we get the young...
Well, you may start having those sleepless nights again as you think about your docket, Bill.
Well, the docket might be an issue, but we can work through the docket. But, seeing the young prosecutors, the brand new ones that we have in there, a couple of senior ones, and then, of course, the great defense attorneys we have coming in here, when they get in the well to argue, that's when you miss the old juices, because that was a lot of fun being a trial attorney and doing that. But so I think overall I immensely enjoy what I'm doing right now. From where I'm at in my life with my wife and my family, it's a good place to be. But I love everything about the bench. I mean, vet court is, quote, my baby. I love it. But at the same time, I love my pro se docket. I know it sounds kind of strange, but for a lot of those folks, not all of them, but a lot of them, it's the first time they, are here accused of something. And they come in there, and I've done I think a pretty good job of letting them know that, hey, this is a serious matter and we got to deal with it, but at the same time, you're an individual and we're going to treat you with respect. And that's one reason why I love my bailiff, Ron Wright. He does a very good job when he has to do his job. He's a big guy, but nevertheless, he will very politely explain to them, look, I'm going to treat you with respect if you treat me with respect, but I got to do my job. And we've never had a problem when you approach somebody like that and you treat them like a human being, and that's something that I think a lot of people need to remember. In fact, I just swore in a new prosecutor with the DA's office, and I always kind of talk to them when I do that. And that's the first thing that I told her was, you need to remember you're dealing with people, and although these are misdemeanors, they're very important crimes, but they also have a huge effect on somebody's life if they're convicted of it. And you need to remember that you need to follow the law, follow the Constitution, and treat them like people.
When I did, I used to early on work loss prevention, catching shoplifters at Fry's Electronic and Foley's, and people would be like, how did you get, because they would fight. We'd be a lot of fights.
Yeah.
Go to catch someone for shoplifting, and there'd be a lot of fights. And when I got a chance to where I could do the initial stop, that I'd just get them back to the office, no fight. I'm like, how do you do that? I go, I treat them like they're a person.
Exactly.
And not like they're a criminal that I'm trying to catch shoplifting. You'd be surprised when you just approach someone like they're a regular person and you're a regular person and have a conversation with them. Just go, hey man, I need to, you know what they were here for. Let's just go back, and they'll be like, okay, and they'll walk back with you. So, and then I do the same thing here. People kind of, when I'm dealing with the craziest of people, they're like, how do you deal with that? And I'm like, you just treat them like a person. There's it's what you do. So, if there was is there anything that you think is lacking? Do you think that the legislature or the VA or anybody could provide that would help with the Veterans Court? Don't be afraid.
Well, there are a whole host of things that could be tweaked. All right, change a little bit that would make things better. And that I'll start with my own team, quite frankly. Tami's working on new application paperwork because right now it's lengthy. The way vet court started here was you had a felony prosecutor, i.e. me, that would take 15 minutes in between dockets and try to plagiarize whatever Tarrant County had, whatever Collin County had. And so the application paperwork is very lengthy. It's kind of redundant. It works. So, the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But nevertheless, this needs to be tweaked a little bit to make it a little easier on the participant. The screening process, again, it's not broken, but we need to fix it. And the main reason why is, again, going back to Judge Crusoe, he had a lot of good things to teach me. And one of the things he taught me is it's all about the screening tools. And you need to make sure that you have as thorough of a screening product as you can, because you need to know who you're dealing with. Vet court is a trauma-related substance abuse court. It's not a mental health court. And some of these folks do have some underlying mental health issues that we're really not set up to treat. Usually we find that out once they get in the program. It would be nice to find that out before they come into the program, so maybe we divert them over to mental health court, or we come up with a better treatment plan for them that addresses both issues, if we can do that. But that's what I would like to tweak. The other thing that I would love to do is make this more pretrial. Okay. Now the law is pretty specific on that they need representation, but we went to Tulsa a long time ago. Tulsa, when they set up their program, they set up as a pretrial program, and from the moment of arrest, there was a case manager in there talking to them while they were still intoxicated. And the next Monday, if they were still in custody, they would see the vet court judge in Tulsa County. Within 2 weeks, they could be in vet court, and we're not set up that way.
Is that a legislation thing? You would need legislation, or is that everything?
It's literally everything. Tulsa, every jurisdiction is different, all right, based off where they're at, where the VA hospital is, and how they're set up. In Tulsa's situation, they had the perfect, wonderful storm of you had the courthouse, you had the VA, you had the jail. They were all right there together. The other thing, too, was their legislature, when they created, it was a drug court is what they created legislatively, they also funded it. So when they started the program, they had, I want to say, at least 8 full-time employees for vet court that did all of that. They hired the right consultants, not consultants, but clinicians, case managers, stuff like that. And so that was a different thing, and that was a funding thing. We know the legislature down in Texas is never going to do that. So over the years, we've band-aided what we could together. Garcia was very good at writing grants and getting grants, and we have maintained those grants, and that helps provide the funding. So that's
Why
been
would
helpful.
that be tough here? I'll tell you, I'm politically ignorant, but it seems like this would be the place we wouldn't have that problem. I mean, Veterans Court?
Well, Veterans Court, but like all the treatment courts, and I'm not beating up the legislature here because they wrote the laws, but they'll write the law and say, hey, if you have a county population of 250,000 or more, you have to have a drug court. That's great. Where's the funding for it?
Yeah.
But they don't fund it. And so they leave it up to the individual communities to figure out how to make it
So
happen.
it's a fun thing, so you got to, I'm assuming you spend part of your time keeping up those grants, making sure, that's what
Tami does. That's what the program manager does, and the grants can be very daunting to track, and she's just gotten a great education in how we fund the county here, working with budget and auditing to get our 2 regular grants that we have, which is the governor's grant. That's a year-to-year grant. We did get it again this year. She's gotten that turned on, and then, of course, we're still operating under a SAMHSA grant, the third year of that, which is a 5-year grant. But without the grants, it would be a radically different program. We could still have a vet court.
What's the main chunk of the grant, of the funding? Because you work with the VA, but is it going towards the outside?
Correct. It's outside counseling and monitoring.
Okay.
We spend about, is it $60,000, $70,000 a year on urine.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that seems ridiculous. It's not. UAing somebody with all the transdermal, the interlock, and all that all adds up to thousands of dollars. But it is all absolutely necessary to maintain that sobriety. Now, you could operate under something less, as far as less monitoring, some sort of pay-to-play where the participant, the veteran, has to pay for themselves. But thankfully, we have these grants because that alleviates all that stress. And we encountered that in the early days of this program when they were having to pay for it themselves. Financially, it is very daunting.
They got to do their own, and there's something psychological to having to do your own P-test that might get you kicked out of it.
Well, you say that, but the truth of it is that a lot of times you talked about sanctions earlier. Let's say we have somebody that misses a UA. They don't call in. We have an automated system. They call in every morning. If they're required to test, they have to go test that day. If they don't, they don't. Let's say they miss one of those. Well, an easy sanction there is, okay, you're going to take another one today, and you're going to pay for it.
Okay.
And then so you hit their pocketbook a little bit. And as you all know, there is some therapy in hitting their pocketbook.
Oh yeah, no. It's the most
but-
effective thing for sure.
But to have the full Cadillac monitoring, the transdermal, the interlock, the patch, and the UAs twice a week, which is what we enjoy right now, if we were to lose that funding, Gilmore and I spent a lot of time on this a couple of years ago. There are levels of monitoring we could work with the district attorney's office to make them accept or get them to accept that would be less than that. But we have the funding right now, so we want the monitoring because that's better for the participant. They don't like that transdermal. They can't wait to get it off after they get done with phase 1. But nevertheless, they know it is virtually foolproof. Virtually foolproof.
So, and this is kind of off topic, but I think it is something coming. And I imagine it's come so far, and maybe if you've been interacting with other states, with other veterans program, the legalization of marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's a thing in the veterans community, not necessarily your program is, kind of using that to alleviate the symptoms of PTSD and stuff. Do you know what other states are doing with, as far as, is that just if you're in our program, you're not allowed to, or has that been an issue?
Generally, that is, Colorado Springs, Judge Shakes, they did not allow marijuana usage. And actually, the SAMHSA grant does not allow us to allow medical marijuana.
Oh.
And so there are other restrictions out there.
So right now, you can't, that grant, you would lose it if you allowed for medical
Correct.
marijuana, which is, I think even here in Texas, I think we're still it's pretty tough to get
Well,
marijuana.
I'm the post commander for the American Legion here in town. At the national level, there is actually a resolution that was passed by the Legion wanting to encourage the exploration of allowing PTSD or marijuana for PTSD treatment. However, that was kind of done internally by...
Wait, so to stop that?
No, to allow it.
Oh, to allow it. Oh,
Okay.
I see. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Now, you are correct. There's a large part of the veterans community that believes that does help them. I'm not sold on that point of view. I think clearly the use of marijuana relaxes you, okay, and certainly calms those symptoms. But if they're using it long term, I think there's so many more side effects and bad health issues related to that.
Plus, I don't know many. I mean, the addiction experts are pretty clear that can lead to other addiction.
We used to argue.
triggers.
Trust me, the prosecutors and I, we would when I was up there in the DA's office, we would argue about the phrase the gateway drug.
Yeah.
I'm still a big believer in the gateway drug. However, with the veterans, it certainly could be that. But as far as alleviating the PTSD, right now it's still illegal here in Texas. I think if it were legalized, we'd have to take another look at that policy. But my gut reaction is there would be no marijuana uses while you're in the program.
I think with addiction, there is.
I would have to have somebody, one of the smart people, tell me, "Oh yeah, you need to do that," and I don't think that's ever going to happen.
I think with addiction, I honestly think every drug is a gateway drug
Yep.
when you're an addict, and that's the issue I have. I don't know if you've come across this, and again, kind of not necessarily directly on topic, but the amount of prescriptions for drugs that Xanax being one.
Yep.
The stimulants for ADHD stuff. The amount of prescriptions for drugs that are absolutely triggering to people with addiction. That these are drugs that are abused widely. Is pretty crazy. Do you deal with that
All the time?
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Yes. You hit on one of the drugs. I'll mention the other one. Xanax is one. The other one is Adderall.
Yeah, that's what I
Okay.
meant. The stimulants,
Correct.
Adderall,
Oh,
methamphetamine salts. I mean, they'll literally just prescribe them.
correct. The problem that we run into is we'll have veterans going to both the VA and also private physicians. And what we've noticed is a lot of times they're not telling both sides what's going on.
Yeah.
And so that's one reason why we brought Tami on as the case manager, is to coordinate those activities with both sets of doctors. Mm-hmm. Again, when they come into the program, they have to tell us who they're going to, how to contact them, if they get a new prescription. What you mentioned before is called the physician's letter, that they have to have the staff of the physician fax to Ellen Anderson so we know it's coming from the doctor's office. And it basically lays out, this is what I'm putting them on. Now, I'm not an MD, just like I'm not some sort of psych doctor, okay? So if there's a doctor out there that knows that they're in vet court, knows they're dealing with these issues, that still says, I'm a doctor, this is my patient, they need to be on this type of medication, I'm not going to be the one to say no to that, because I'm not that kind of doctor. However, I want to know that just the way I described that doctor is in the know.
Yeah.
this is what this person's going through.
Because there are some doctors in the know who will still do that. I tell my clients who are dealing with that, any addict, I say there's another prescription out there that's not
correct
Xanax or that's not Adderall.
We've dealt with Adderall quite a bit.
Yes, we have.
And I think there is still one veteran that her VA doctor, who knew everything that was going on, said, nope, she's the one. Yeah. And she can stay on it. And some of our team, that does not make happy at all. But nevertheless, I'm not going to contradict a VA doctor who knows everything that this veteran's doing in this program. And they are still looking at me and saying, Judge, they need to be on it. Okay. The rest of them, they all need to be weaned off of it. Everybody got on board, and they went through some difficult times as they weaned off to other drugs. But all of them, except for one, and I think we could probably grudgingly get him to admit it once he was off the Adderall. Was like, you know what, things are different.
Mm-hmm. And that's how I feel about marijuana, which is, I'm actually, I'm not against it on any, except if you're an addict. I mean, that's the one thing I think, like having, been in this system and dealt with it, the one thing that seems to work is abstinence. And these people,
correct.
I think anybody who works with addicts, you can count down till, it's just a beer, or I'm just going to smoke marijuana, to, you can count down to, full blown, doing methamphetamines or something like that. So, okay, well, thank you. Do you have anything else you want to add? You want defense attorneys to know? Anybody to know?
Oh. Yeah, we're open for business. I want to brag on Ed and Carrie, even though Carrie's not with the program anymore.
That's Ed Nolter.
Ed Nolter and Carrie Peel. They've done a phenomenal job here in this program. And we do have a spot that is open. I've got a couple of people that are interested I have not had a chance to get back to, but we are looking to get Ed some reinforcements. Ed does a lot with the program. I guess his heavy lifting comes at the end, and that's where he needs some assistance. It's grunt work, but nevertheless, it's expunction. Yeah. But there are a lot of things that come up that, as we tell them, he's kind of like an attorney ad litem. But if you need to talk to him, whether you got arrested again or you got a sanction or you're looking at a sanction, what you tell Ed is totally confidential. He's there to represent you in this matter in the courtroom. But Ed has done a wonderful job of understanding that sometimes that representation, does require that, hey, Judge, you do need to sanction him. I just don't do it as much, or something along those lines. Because he understands, as a member of the bar, you have not only a duty to zealously represent your client, but you also have a duty to do what's in their best interest. And in this type of treatment court program, that's really, it's a weird place for a defense attorney, but nevertheless, it's a place I think they need to be. And Ed has done a very good job with that, and so did Carrie. And Sean Kilmore and Joe Zelmer did that in the past too. They were excellent as well.
But you need some backup for another defense attorney.
Correct. And I like I said, I've got a couple of people I think are interested. I just have not had the time to reach out to them to sit down and talk to them like we are right here about that. But I think Ed would tell you it's very rewarding. Again, Zoom has kind of affected that experience, and anybody that's interested needs to realize that we are going to be Zooming for a while. But once we come back in person, it's a different, more rewarding experience in the courtroom.
Are you seeing an uptick since COVID, the lockdown and everything? Are you seeing an uptick in your violations, or no?
Not really. In fact, that's I've commended Ed there, but I'll commend the veterans too. Mm-hmm. We've had some issues, but they're here issues like their trauma or their substance abuse. But the veterans have been doing very well. Mm-hmm. And they've been keeping in touch with their mentors. I know they kind of talk, like I said, via their text chains and, of course, just phone calls. And so they've been looking out for one another. And they've actually been doing really well.
They have.
Well, that's the best thing about the vet court. I kind of touched on it earlier. It's like you're taking the most vulnerable population and turning them into the least vulnerable population. You know what I'm saying? Like, because you're giving them the tools and community and camaraderie that would generally help anybody,
Yeah.
So all right.
You got anything?
No, I was just going to say, reach out if you have any questions about anything, and we are, like the judge said, open for business. Please contact us if you have anybody.
And her extension is 2189.
All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Have a good one. Happy belated Veterans Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.